The first envelope looked official enough to be mistaken for truth, thick paper, blue stripe, the kind of mail that makes your stomach brace before your eyes catch up, and inside it was a number that didn't belong to reality. $70,000, allegedly owed to the Meadow Ridge Homeowners Association for violating a right of first refusal on a property that has never, not for a single day, been part of Meadow Ridge. It named my lakeside cedar cabin like it was born under their covenants, like they'd paved the deer trails and poured concrete into the lake the day my grandfather hammered the first nail, and it gave me 10 days to pay or face liens, foreclosure, and referral to law enforcement. I read it twice, then a third time because fury makes you slow down when you ought to speed up, and by the fourth read I heard my grandfather's voice like the strike of a match. Take a breath, then take a stand. So I drove up to the cabin at first light, the lake still in that silver mood it wears before the sun remembers color, and I found an orange HOA sticker slapped on the window like a bruise that read Stop Transfer Community Interest Encumbrance, signed by the person who calls herself president with a serif flourish under her name. Karen Albright. She had the look of someone who collects titles the way kids collect badges, and she showed up in person an hour later with 2 board members, a cousin who wasn't a cousin, and a clipboard of bylaws so swollen with sticky notes it looked like a hedgehog. "You can't sell without giving us the option," she announced before good morning could land. "Our charter protects property values. You signed when you moved in." I told her the cabin sits outside the subdivision map, 10 minutes on a gravel spur past the gated entrance she polices like a drawbridge. I told her my deed predates her HOA by 31 years. I told her the word she used option has a meaning you can't pluck from thin air because it sounds like power. She smiled like a person who believes volume can beat facts, then peeled a second orange sticker from her hedgehog binder and pressed it above the first. "Non-compliance triggers daily fines," she said. "We'll place a lien this afternoon." She turned to her not-cousin. "Daniel, take photos for the file." I had my phone recording and my trail cam catching her reflection in the glass because my grandfather also taught me that paper is kind but cameras are kinder. While she posed with a hand on her hip and a hammer in the other as if the cabin were a stage, I called the county recorder and asked whether any encumbrance had been recorded on my parcel. The clerk put me on hold, then came back with a voice that couldn't decide between confusion and apology. "We do have an affidavit of restriction filed this morning, sir," referencing a master declaration for Meadow Ridge. Unusual. I asked for the document number, thanked her, and felt the heat move from my neck to my fists. Meanwhile, Karen dialed the sheriff and reported me for attempting to transfer encumbered property and threatening HOA officials. Her voice jumping registers like it liked the sound of sirens coming. She didn't expect the deputy who stepped out of the cruiser to be the same one who helped me pull a stranded canoeist off a snag last spring. He greeted me by name, took in the scene, read the stickers with a mouth twitch, and asked for paperwork. Karen produced a copy of the master declaration that applied to houses around a cul-de-sac a mile away and a photocopy of a map so photocopied the lines had become suggestions. I offered my deed, a survey with the county seal, and the original plat showing our parcel sitting like a stubborn island beyond the HOA's border. The deputy nodded and kept his face neutral, the way good people do when they're standing between a lie and a loudspeaker. "This looks outside your jurisdiction," he told Karen, careful but clear. "Civil issues are for civil court. Please remove the stickers. If you don't, that's vandalism." She refused. He carefully peeled them off himself for evidence, bagged them, and told everyone to breathe. I did, but not because I wanted to. I did because the next breath had work to do. By noon I'd scanned the affidavit at the county and felt the weird pinch you get when something is wrong in a way that'll take hours to name. The notary seal was a ghost blurry, misaligned, the commission number partly wrong, like someone copied someone else's authority in a dim room. The affidavit cited a covenant that was recorded on a different subdivision years later and tried to lasso my parcel with a paragraph that read like a spell. It also included a page that did not match the font of the others, a graft from a different document, a page that invoked transfer fees. Those junk levies states have been banning because they turn neighbors into toll collectors. Karen's signature perched on the bottom of every page like a stamp of nerve. My buyer Lila Hart, a high school counselor who wanted to turn the cabin into a grief retreat for kids who had lost parents, called me. Voice steady like someone who sits in rooms where children pour their broken days onto carpet. "Tell me what you need," she said. I'll wait, but I won't let them scare me. I told her the HOA had picked a fight with a ghost, not a person, and ghosts lose when you put them in the sun. So I opened what I always open when people with clipboards try to build a world from paper cuts. I made a folder called Sunlight. Inside I put the deed, the plat, the survey, the county map, and a copy of the state statute that bans transfer fee covenants on properties recorded after a certain date. Meadow Ridge's birth date was 10 years too late. I added the deputy's incident number and a transcript of Karen's voicemail from that morning. You can make this easy, or you can learn the hard way how community works. I printed everything because people in power pretend truth isn't real until they can hold it. The board scheduled an emergency compliance hearing in their clubhouse at 6, and Karen sent a blast email to the HOA list declaring I was threatening shared assets by removing lawful notices. She CC'd the property manager and the county commissioner. She loved a crowd. I showed up early to test the projector and sat in the back row to remind myself that whatever noise followed, I had proof. The room smelled like coffee and victory baked too soon. Karen banged a gavel on a plastic folding table like it wanted to be oak. "We are here to address a brazen violation," she began, and I felt the room lean toward her magnet. She called me forward and spoke my name like it was an infraction. "You removed legal notices from a community property. You attempted to convey a structure without board approval. Your fines now total $70,000. Do you intend to pay, or will we proceed to lien?" I asked who wrote the affidavit. She said the board approved it. I asked which attorney drafted it. She said our counsel, as if a name would break like glass in her mouth. I asked the notary's name. She looked down. "It was done at the recorder's office," she said, which was both impossible and, from her, predictable. And then the door opened and in walked someone I recognized only by the rhythm with which she carried a stack of boxes. The quiet clerk from the recorder's office, Alma, the one whose voice had hesitated over unusual this morning. She wasn't in her work cardigan. She wore a windbreaker with a simple patch, County Inspector. She had a supervisor with her. They walked to the front, apologized to the room for the interruption, and asked the board to step aside for a moment, because these boxes contained things the room needed to know before the board proceeded. The gavel tried to protest, but quiet fell when the word fraud sat down next to it. Alma's boss announced that the affidavit filed that morning appeared to use a notary stamp belonging to a deceased notary whose commission expired 8 years ago. The seal image ripped from a corporate filing and stretched until the numbers migrated. The affidavit also used legal descriptions from a different subdivision and referenced a statute repealed in 2019. The recorder's office had referred the matter to the state attorney general for potential document fraud, attempted filing of a false instrument, and civil conspiracy. The room didn't breathe for a full 10 seconds. Karen laughed a sound like a fork hitting tile. "This is a misunderstanding," she said. But even her allies' faces had that look people get when chairs disappear under them. Alma put a neat folder on the table and opened it like a window. A log of access to public computers at the recorder's kiosk showing Karen's login that morning. A camera still of her standing at the scanner feeding in pages that never touched a lobby clerk's hands. And finally, a printed email she sent at 8:17 a.m. to the property manager bragging about locking down my cabin before I could flip it to some grief retreat and drag down our comps. Lila raised her hand from the back and said in a calm voice that held more steel than any gavel, "Hi. I'm the grief retreat." The board attorney arrived late and left earlier than his briefcase, mumbling about needing to review, and by the time he returned, the deputy from the lake and a detective from the AG's Public Integrity Unit had slipped along the wall like factual shadows. You know how heat shivers over a road just before a storm? The room had that. Then came the part one hadn't expected to happen that quickly, the twist that tilts the floor. The detective produced a flash drive and a chain of custody form from a teenage neighbor named Gabe who runs trail cameras like other kids run gaming PCs. One of his cameras, aimed at the cabin driveway because elk sometimes wander through, caught Karen's vice president, a contractor named Briggs, cutting my for sale sign down with a reciprocating saw at midnight and loading it into his truck. Another camera caught him the next night carrying a red gas can toward my porch while a lookout sat in a black SUV idling with the lights off. He left when the neighbor's porch light popped on. The detective said the phrase nobody wants to say out loud but everybody needs to hear when someone pretends to own you. Attempted arson. The board members backed away from Karen like a campfire popping hot sap. She said the videos were deepfakes, and the room made a noise I can only describe as the sound a lie makes when it runs out of path. The detective set down a stack of stills. The deputy bagged Karen's gavel because it had become evidence somehow, a prop from an attempt to turn civic life into a racket. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Sunlight had arrived and was doing what it always does. The hearing adjourned not with a bang, but with a statement from the property manager that the HOA would temporarily suspend enforcement related to outlying parcels pending legal review, which is bureaucrat for we touched a hot stove and we are done touching. But it didn't end at the clubhouse. These things never do. The AG's office moved like a quiet tide across the next month's subpoenas to the management company, a warrant for Briggs's tools and truck, a polite but firm visit to the HOA treasurer who had moved transfer fee money through a side account labeled consulting. The county referred the dead notary stamp to the state notary board. The sheriff pulled the midnight Gaskin footage onto the big screen for a grand jury. Karen tried to rally sympathy with a newsletter about outside forces and dangerous anti-HOA sentiment. But you can't sell smoke to neighbors who have smelled the lake burn. My cabin sat in the pines and waited. Lila kept meeting me there on Saturdays to read aloud the letters from kids she counseled. We sanded the porch railing because sanding is what your hands can do while the rest of the world is busy counting harms. The trial, when it came, didn't look like TV. It looked like 10 seats of residence and a tired judge with a clean mind. It looked like Karen in a blazer 2 shades paler than her certainty. It looked like Briggs in a county suit 1 size too big. It looked like transfer records on a projector and a grief counselor explaining why a cabin matters more than a comp. It looked like Alma tracing her finger under the rolled stamp numbers and saying the notary had been dead 8 years. It looked like the deputy describing orange stickers and quiet warnings. It looked like the detective lining up stills of a gas can, a glove, a truck bed, a reciprocating saw, and the dark SUV idling like a heartbeat. It looked like the jury foreperson reading out words the room already knew. Guilty on filing a false instrument, guilty on attempted theft by deception, guilty on conspiracy to commit wire fraud, guilty on attempted arson in the 2nd degree, guilty on witness tampering for the anonymous voicemail to Gabe telling him accidents happen to nosy kids. The sentencing happened weeks later under the same fluorescent lights as every other ordinary Wednesday where lives turn. The Judge Morales, a man who asks counsel to define terms as if the dictionary were wholly looked over his glasses and made a little roof with his fingers. He said he'd read 3 dozen letters, some begging for mercy because Karen once collected coats for a drive, others begging for justice because mercy without truth insults the people who obey rules under duress. He said HOA power is a tool for trimming hedges, not a weapon for hunting neighbors. He said the dead notary stamp haunted him because it meant someone tried to borrow authority from a grave. He said the gas can broke him because it meant someone valued a price per square foot over a child's diary in a bedside drawer. He sentenced Briggs to 12 years for the arson attempt and the racketeering count that rode with the money movement. He sentenced Karen to 20 years 10 in, 10 suspended on strict probation for orchestrating the scheme, for the false filings, for the witness tampering call she made from a burner that pinged a tower behind her own backyard. People gasped like air had been edited out of the room and then returned. The HOA fines against me were vacated with prejudice. The affidavit was ordered expunged. The judge ordered restitution to the county, to the management company for the forensic audit it had to endure once it realized it had been used, and to Lila's nonprofit for the months of delay. He told me gently that anger can settle into a body like winter if you let it, and then he told the room that communities fail when bullies discover bylaws. When we walked out onto the courthouse steps, the lake breeze felt like a person. I didn't cheer. I bought a stack of cedar planks and built a signpost at the edge of my driveway. Not for the HOA, but for anyone who forgets that lines matter and so do people. Kids from the block wrote on a wooden board with a marker, and we planted it in the grass near the cabin with handwriting that said what needed saying. HOA fined me $70,000. Judge sent them to prison. Lila closed on the property that afternoon. We signed under the pines with a notary whose hand didn't shake and whose seal was crisp, aligned, alive. We left a chair open by the water and called it Grandpa's, not because ghosts sit, but because people like me remember who taught them to keep paper and say no. The HOA held a special election 2 weeks later. They rewrote their charter with a sunlight clause. Before any enforcement action, the board must publish the rule in plain language, cite the map that gives them jurisdiction, and secure independent counsel before sending a single dollar demand. They also created a help desk for widows who don't understand tree height limits and for young families who can't afford a second trash can. Alma got promoted and no longer has to whisper unusual. The deputy who peeled the stickers taught a class on civil versus criminal at the clubhouse with cookies and laughter at the spots where we nearly lost the thread. And under the porch, the cabinet that held my grandfather's nails now holds blank paper and pens. Because people still forget to breathe and then to write. Karen will come out one day older and maybe different. Maybe not. That's not my job. My job is to keep the path to the dock swept and the porch light working for the kids who will sit with Lila and tell the lake what they wish they could tell the people they lost. Some nights the water is a mirror and I see myself at 16 hammering a plank while Grandpa says don't let anybody with a title write on your life in ink. I hear the judge tell a full room that order without justice is theater. I hear Lila reading a note from a boy who said being brave is sometimes just staying put when someone with a clipboard says move. So I'll ask you now because stories aren't verdicts, they're invitations. When an HOA Karen finds a neighbor into a corner and calls it community, do we clap back with everything the law allows or leave room for a softer ending? Where would you draw the line between mercy and justice? And what would you have done if that cabin door were yours?